The red carpet stretched like a crimson river across Leicester Square, lined with photographers whose camera flashes created a constant lightning storm in the early evening light. London's summer air buzzed with excitement as hundreds of fans pressed against the barriers, their voices creating a wall of sound that echoed off the historic buildings surrounding the square. Tonight was special, even by London premiere standards. Christopher Nolan's latest masterpiece, Dunkirk, was having its world premiere, and the guest list read like a who's who of British culture, military heroes, and international celebrities. Among the crowd of screaming fans, two names rose above all others, chanted with equal fervor but for entirely different reasons. "Harry! Harry! Harry!" they screamed, though the question remained which Harry they were calling for. Would it be Harry Styles, the former One Direction heartthrob turned serious actor, making his dramatic debut in Nolan's war epic? Or would it be Prince Harry, the beloved royal who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and understood better than most the weight of military sacrifice that the film portrayed? The answer, as it turned out, would be both. Harry Styles arrived first, stepping out of a sleek black car with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of performing in front of massive crowds. But this confidence felt different tonight, more grounded, more serious. Gone was the playful pop star energy that had defined his teenage years. In its place stood a young man who had spent months preparing for the most important role of his career, working alongside seasoned actors like Tom Hardy and Kenneth Branagh, learning to carry the weight of a character whose story represented thousands of real young men who had faced impossible odds on the beaches of France in 1940. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that seemed to mirror the deep blues of the English Channel, accessorized with a simple white shirt and a thin black tie. His hair, longer than his military character Alex had worn it in the film, was styled in soft waves that caught the camera flashes. But it was his expression that caught attention. There was a new depth there, a seriousness that spoke to the transformation he had undergone during the filming process. The photographers called his name as he walked slowly down the red carpet, stopping to pose with the kind of professional ease that comes from years of practice. But his interactions with the press were different now. When asked about his experience filming Dunkirk, he spoke with genuine reverence about the historical events, about the research he had done, about meeting actual Dunkirk survivors who had shared their stories with him. This wasn't just another movie role for him. It was a responsibility he had taken seriously. "Working on this film changed my perspective on everything," he told one interviewer, his voice carrying none of the casual charm that had characterized his pop star persona. "These were real people, real stories. Boys my age who went through something unimaginable. I felt the weight of representing that truth every single day we filmed." The fans screamed louder as he moved closer to the theater entrance, many of them holding signs that showed his face both as a One Direction member and as his character from Dunkirk. The transformation was remarkable, and they have followed every step of his journey from boy band member to serious actor with devoted attention. Meanwhile, across London, another Harry was preparing for his evening. Prince Harry sat in his private quarters at Kensington Palace, adjusting his military dress uniform with practiced precision. The rows of medals across his chest told their own story of service and sacrifice, each one earned through his years in the British Army, including his deployments to Afghanistan where he had served as an Apache helicopter pilot. For Prince Harry, attending the Dunkirk premiere was more than a social obligation. It was a chance to honor the memory of the soldiers whose story the film told, men who had fought for the same country he had sworn to serve. He had read extensively about the Dunkirk evacuation, had spoken with historians and survivors, and understood that this film represented something important in British military history. His aide briefed him on the evening's schedule as he prepared to leave. The premiere would include meeting with some of the surviving veterans of the actual Dunkirk evacuation, men now in their 90s who had lived through the events portrayed on screen. It would also mean interacting with the film's cast and crew, including the young actor who had surprised everyone by transitioning from pop music to serious drama. Interesting choice, bringing in Harry Styles, his aide had mentioned during the briefing. Quite a departure from his usual work. Prince Harry had nodded thoughtfully. He had followed the casting news with curiosity, wondering how the former boy band member would handle such a significant role. Military service had taught him the importance of proving oneself through actions rather than reputation, and he was genuinely curious to see how Styles had approached the challenge. As his car pulled away from Kensington Palace toward Leicester Square, Prince Harry found himself thinking about the parallels between military service and acting. Both required discipline, dedication, and the ability to subsume one's individual identity for a greater purpose. He wondered if Styles had discovered these parallels during his preparation for the role. Back at Leicester Square, the crowd's energy had reached a fever pitch. Word had spread that Prince Harry was expected to arrive soon, and the combination of royal excitement and movie premiere glamour had created an electric atmosphere. Security teams coordinated carefully, knowing that managing crowds excited about both a pop star turned actor and a beloved royal would require extra attention. Harry Styles had finished his initial red carpet walk and was now inside the theater's reception area, mingling with other cast members and dignitaries. The space was elegantly decorated with wartime memorabilia and photographs from the actual Dunkirk evacuation, creating a respectful atmosphere that honored the historical significance of the story being celebrated. Christopher Nolan moved through the crowd with characteristic intensity, discussing technical aspects of the filming with various guests. The director had taken a significant risk casting Styles in such an important role, and the positive early reactions to the film had validated his instinct. Styles had proven himself capable of disappearing into the character, of serving the story rather than his own celebrity. He approached it like a true ensemble player, Nolan had told reporters earlier. Never try to make it about his own star power. Just focused on telling the story truthfully. As Styles spoke with various guests, including some of the actual Dunkirk veterans who had been invited to the premiere, he found himself deeply moved by their presence. These men, now elderly but still carrying themselves with military bearing, represented the living link to the events he had spent months portraying. Their handshakes were firm, their eyes sharp with memories that spanned 8 decades. "You did us proud, lad," one veteran told him, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through the events portrayed in the film. Captured something true about what those boys went through. The compliment meant more to Styles than any music award he had ever received. This was validation from someone who understood the reality behind the performance, who could judge whether the portrayal honored the memory of those who had served. Outside, Prince Harry's arrival sent a fresh wave of excitement through the crowd. He emerged from his car with military precision, acknowledging the cheers with a warm wave before walking purposefully toward the theater entrance. His presence added a different dimension to the evening, bringing real military authority to a celebration of military history. The photographers captured his every step, noting how he paused to speak with some of the veterans who had gathered near the entrance, men whose service connected them to the same tradition of military duty that he represented. These conversations were clearly meaningful to him, and he took time with each veteran despite the scheduled demands of the evening. Inside the theater, word quickly spread that Prince Harry had arrived. The atmosphere shifted slightly, taking on the formal edge that royal presence always brought to public events. Staff members made final adjustments to the evening's program, ensuring that proper protocol would be followed for the royal guest. Harry Styles found himself curious about meeting the prince, not because of royal status, but because of what he had learned about Prince Harry's military service during his research for the film. The prince had served in Afghanistan, had faced real combat situations, had experienced the kind of military brotherhood that Styles had tried to capture in his portrayal of Alex. The two Harrys were about to meet, bringing together 2 different kinds of service to Britain, 2 different approaches to public duty, and 2 different perspectives on what it meant to honor military sacrifice through their respective roles in society. The moment would prove to be more significant than either of them expected, creating a connection that transcended their obvious differences and found common ground in their shared respect for military service and the stories that needed to be told about British courage in the face of impossible odds. The stage was set for an interaction that would surprise everyone present with its genuine warmth and mutual respect, proving that sometimes the most unlikely connections can produce the most meaningful conversations. The reception area buzzed with controlled excitement as Prince Harry entered, his presence immediately shifting the room's energy. Protocol officers moved discreetly through the crowd, ensuring proper arrangements for royal interactions while maintaining the evening's focus on honoring military history. The prince moved with natural ease through the gathering, stopping to speak with veterans, film crew members, and other dignitaries with equal attention and respect. Harry Styles found himself watching from across the room as Prince Harry engaged with the Dunkirk survivors. The royals' approach was notably different from the typical celebrity interaction styles had witnessed throughout his career. There was genuine interest in Prince Harry's questions, real attention to the answers he received, and a quality of listening that spoke to his own military experience and understanding of service. Christopher Nolan approached Styles during this observation moment, noticing the actor's thoughtful expression. "Quite something, isn't it?" the director said quietly. "Watching someone who understands military service on that level. He's not just being polite with those veterans." Styles nodded, struck by the authenticity of the interactions he was witnessing. You could tell he gets it, the weight of what they went through. It's different from trying to understand it as an outsider. The director smiled. "That's exactly why I thought you two should meet tonight. Different paths to understanding the same truth about service and sacrifice." Before Styles could ask what Nolan meant by that comment, a protocol officer approached them. "Mr. Styles, His Royal Highness Prince Harry would like to meet you when convenient." The invitation was clearly more than ceremonial courtesy. Protocol officers didn't typically seek out specific individuals for royal meetings unless there was genuine interest involved. Styles felt a flutter of nerves that reminded him of his first major performances, but this was different. This wasn't about entertaining an audience. It was about meeting someone whose own service gave him unique authority to judge the authenticity of military portrayals. As he made his way across the room, Styles noticed how conversations naturally paused as Prince Harry's attention shifted. The prince was finishing a discussion with Tom Hardy about the film's aviation sequences, drawing on his own experience as a helicopter pilot to engage with the technical aspects of the aerial scenes. The authenticity of the flying sequences was remarkable, Prince Harry was saying to Hardy. "You captured something real about what it's like up there, the isolation and the responsibility." Hardy nodded appreciatively. "Coming from someone with your experience, that means everything. We worked hard to get those details right." It was at this moment that Prince Harry noticed Styles approaching. The royal's expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity as he extended his hand in greeting. "Harry Styles," he said with a warm smile. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Heard quite a lot about your preparation for this role." The handshake was firm, direct, and lasted just long enough to convey real interest rather than mere politeness. Styles was struck immediately by Prince Harry's directness, the absence of the formal distance he had expected from royal interaction. "Your Royal Highness," Styles responded, then caught himself. "I mean, Prince Harry. Thank you for your service, first of all." Prince Harry's smile became more genuine. "Please, just Harry tonight. And thank you, but I think we're here to honor service that happened long before either of us were born." "How did you find the experience of portraying Alex?" "I imagine it was quite different from your usual work." The question was direct, but not challenging, asked with the kind of professional interest that one serious person might show in another's work. Styles felt his nerves settle as he recognized that this was going to be a real conversation rather than a ceremonial exchange. "Completely different," Styles admitted. "The responsibility was unlike anything I'd ever felt. These weren't fictional characters we were playing. They were real people who went through something unimaginable. I spent months trying to understand what that would have been like, what kind of courage it would have required." Prince Harry nodded thoughtfully. "That's the challenge, isn't it? How do you honor something you haven't experienced yourself?" "I found that when I met veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts before my own deployment, there's always that question of whether you can truly understand without having lived it." The conversation was drawing attention from others in the room, not because of its volume, but because of its obvious sincerity. Other guests found themselves naturally creating space around the two Harrys, sensing that something genuine was taking place. "Did you meet any Dunkirk survivors during your research?" Prince Harry asked. "Several," Styles replied. "There's one gentleman, Albert Fig, who was 19 when it happened. He told me stories that, well, they changed how I approached the entire role. He described waiting on the beach, not knowing if rescue would come, watching friends disappear into the water. The way he talked about fear and hope existing at the same time, it was incredible." Prince Harry's expression grew more serious. "I know Albert. Met him at a veterans event last year. Remarkable man. Still sharp as a tack at 96. What did he tell you about the waiting?" "That was the hardest part," Styles said, his voice dropping slightly as he remembered the conversation. "Not the fighting, not even the dying, but the not knowing. The uncertainty about whether they'd been abandoned or if help was coming. He said they had to find ways to keep believing when belief seemed impossible. That's something they don't often talk about in the history books," Prince Harry observed. "The psychological weight of military situations. The internal battle that goes on alongside the external one." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of several Dunkirk veterans, led by the same Albert Fig that Styles had mentioned. The elderly man moved with a walking stick, but carried himself with unmistakable military bearing despite his advanced age. "Your Royal Highness," Fig said with a slight nod to Prince Harry, then turned to Styles with a grin. "And here's our young actor. Been telling everyone about you, lad. How you listen to our stories, ask the right questions." Prince Harry smiled warmly at the veteran. "Mr. Fig, wonderful to see you again. I hear you've been helping Mr. Styles understand what Dunkirk was really like." "You want to get it right," Fig said approvingly. "Not many young people take the time to really listen anymore. But this one, he understood that we weren't just telling war stories. We were sharing something sacred." The word sacred hung in the air between them, carrying weight that all three men understood. Styles felt the full impact of what Fig meant, the responsibility that had been placed on him to honor not just a historical event, but the personal experiences of men who had lived through it. "Mr. Fig taught me that Dunkirk wasn't really about military strategy," Styles said to Prince Harry. "It was about ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they had no choice." Prince Harry nodded slowly. "That's what military service teaches you, isn't it? That courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear because something larger than yourself depends on it." The veteran looked between the two younger men with approval. "You both understand something important. Service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done, regardless of the cost to yourself." Another veteran, introduced as James Pemberton, joined their small circle. At 94, he moved slowly but with dignity, his eyes still sharp with intelligence and memory. "This is the young man who played Alex?" Pemberton asked, studying Styles with careful attention. "Yes, sir," Styles replied, feeling once again the weight of representing these men's experiences. Pemberton nodded approvingly. "Saw the film this afternoon at the private screening. You captured something true about those boys. The fear, yes, but also the determination. The way they looked out for each other." Prince Harry listened to this exchange with obvious interest. "That brotherhood aspect, was it something you found important to portray?" "Essential," Styles replied. "The veterans all talked about it. How they weren't fighting for abstract concepts like country or freedom, though those mattered. They were fighting for the man next to them, to not let their mates down." "Same thing I experienced in Afghanistan," Prince Harry said quietly. "You realize pretty quickly that your motivation becomes very simple. You're there for the people beside you, and they're there for you." The conversation was creating ripples throughout the reception. Other guests found themselves drawn toward the small group, not to interrupt, but to witness what was clearly becoming something special. The easy interaction between the two Harrys, facilitated by the presence of actual veterans, was creating a moment of genuine connection that transcended celebrity and protocol. Christopher Nolan approached the group with several other cast members, including Tom Hardy and Mark Rylance. "Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt, but we're being called to take our seats for the screening." Prince Harry turned to Styles with what appeared to be genuine regret at ending their conversation. "I hope we can continue this discussion afterward. I'd like to hear more about your preparation process. I'd like that very much, Styles replied, and he meant it. This wasn't politeness or networking. He had found himself genuinely engaged with someone whose perspective offered new insights into the experiences he had worked so hard to understand and portray. As the group began moving toward the theater proper, Albert Fig placed a gentle hand on Styles' arm. You've done something good here, lad. Not just with the film, but with how you've approached it. We can tell when someone takes our stories seriously. The validation from the veteran meant more to Styles than any review or box office number ever could. But equally meaningful was the connection he had begun to form with Prince Harry, a connection based on shared respect for military service and the stories that emerged from it. As they moved toward their seats, both Harrys found themselves looking forward to the screening with new anticipation, knowing that they would be watching it in the company of people who truly understood its significance. The theater fell into hushed anticipation as guests took their seats for the screening. The venue had been chosen specifically for its historical significance, a classic London cinema that had operated during the war years and had actually shown newsreels of the Dunkirk evacuation to audiences in 1940. The connection between past and present felt particularly strong as the lights dimmed and Christopher Nolan's epic began to unfold on the screen. Prince Harry had been seated in the royal box, but he had specifically requested to sit among the veterans in the main theater, a gesture that spoke to his genuine desire to honor their presence rather than maintain ceremonial distance. Styles found himself several rows ahead, surrounded by cast and crew, but acutely aware that the real judges of their work were scattered throughout the audience in the form of men who had lived through the events being portrayed. As the film began, the theater became completely silent except for the powerful sound design that Nolan had crafted to immerse audiences in the experience of war. The opening sequence, showing young soldiers trapped on the beach at Dunkirk, carried particular weight given the presence of men who had actually stood on that beach 8 decades earlier. Styles watched his own performance with the critical eye he had developed during months of preparation, but he found himself more interested in observing the reactions of the veterans in the audience. During the scenes he appeared in, he could sense a different quality of attention from those who had lived through similar experiences. Their evaluation carried weight that no film critic could match. Behind him, Prince Harry was having his own powerful reaction to the film. His military training allowed him to appreciate the tactical accuracy of the battle scenes, while his experience in Afghanistan gave him insight into the psychological pressures the characters faced. He found himself particularly drawn to the younger soldiers in the film, boys barely out of their teens who had been thrust into impossible circumstances. The aerial sequences, featuring Tom Hardy as a Spitfire pilot, resonated strongly with Prince Harry's experience as a helicopter pilot. He understood the isolation of flying in combat situations, the weight of responsibility that came with operating sophisticated machinery in life-or-death circumstances. The film captured something authentic about that experience that he had rarely seen portrayed accurately in cinema. When Styles' character Alex first appeared on screen, Prince Harry paid particular attention to the performance. Having spent the evening talking with the actor about his preparation process, he was curious to see how that preparation had translated into the actual portrayal. What he saw impressed him. There was nothing of the pop star persona in the performance, no sense of celebrity trying to play soldier. Instead, he saw a young actor who had successfully disappeared into the character, serving the story rather than his own image. The evacuation scenes, showing hundreds of small boats crossing the English Channel to rescue stranded soldiers, carried particular emotional weight. These were the moments that had defined British identity for generations, the civilian courage that had made the military rescue possible. In the audience, several veterans wiped their eyes as they watched dramatizations of events they had witnessed firsthand. During a particularly intense sequence showing soldiers waiting under enemy fire, Styles heard a quiet voice behind him. It was one of the veterans, speaking in a whisper to his companion. That's exactly how it was. The noise, the waiting, not knowing if the next shell had your name on it. The validation was overwhelming. Styles felt a deep sense of relief that their work had achieved its primary goal, honoring the truth of what these men had experienced. All the months of preparation, all the research and interviews had been directed toward this moment of recognition from those who had lived through the real events. Prince Harry found himself equally moved by the film's portrayal of leadership under pressure. The characters faced impossible decisions with limited information, forced to balance individual survival against collective good. It reminded him of situations he had faced in Afghanistan, though in vastly different circumstances. The fundamental challenge remained the same: how to make the right choices when there were no good options available. The film's approach to heroism particularly impressed both Harrys. Rather than celebrating individual acts of bravery, Nolan had focused on collective courage, on ordinary people rising to meet extraordinary challenges. It was a mature view of military service that avoided both glorification and condemnation, instead presenting war as a series of impossible situations that revealed both the best and worst of human nature. As the evacuation reached its climax on screen, with hundreds of boats arriving to rescue the stranded soldiers, the emotional impact in the theater was palpable. This was the moment that had transformed military defeat into spiritual victory, that had provided Britain with a narrative of courage that had sustained the nation through its darkest hour. When the credits began to roll, the theater remained silent for several long moments. The audience seemed reluctant to break the spell that the film had cast, to return from the beaches of Dunkirk to the comfort of a London cinema. When applause finally began, it started slowly and built to a sustained ovation that felt more like reverence than mere appreciation. The veterans in the audience stood first, their applause carrying the weight of personal memory and validation. They had seen their experiences portrayed with respect and authenticity, their stories told to a new generation in a way that honored both the facts and the emotional truth of what they had endured. Prince Harry joined the standing ovation with obvious emotion, his applause directed not just toward the filmmakers, but toward the veterans whose stories had made the film possible. He understood that entertainment was not the primary purpose of what they had just witnessed. This was an act of remembrance, a way of ensuring that crucial stories would not be forgotten. Styles remained in his seat a moment longer than the others, overwhelmed by the response from the audience, and particularly by the approval he could sense from the veterans present. This was validation of the most meaningful kind, confirmation that his transition from music to acting had been undertaken for the right reasons, and achieved with the necessary respect for the subject matter. Christopher Nolan took the stage to address the audience, but his remarks were brief and focused on honoring the veterans present rather than celebrating his own work. "Tonight belongs to the men who lived this story," he said simply. "We are privileged to have some of them with us, and we hope we have served their memory well." As the formal screening concluded and guests began moving toward the reception area, both Harrys found themselves surrounded by well-wishers and reviewers seeking comments. But their attention remained focused on reconnecting with each other and continuing the conversation they had begun earlier. Prince Harry made his way towards Styles through the crowd, stopping frequently to speak with veterans and other guests, but clearly moving with purpose. When he reached the actor, his first words were not about the performance, but about the response it had generated. "Did you see their faces?" Prince Harry asked, referring to the veterans. "That was real recognition. You've done something important here." Styles felt a surge of gratitude for the prince's immediate focus on what mattered most. "It was everything I hoped for," he replied. "To have them approve, to feel like we got it right, that's all that really matters. The way you portrayed Alex, the fear mixed with determination, that was spot on," Prince Harry continued. "I could see myself at 22 in some of those expressions. Not in Afghanistan, obviously, but the fundamental experience of young men facing impossible situations." Their conversation was interrupted by Albert Fig, who approached them with tears in his eyes, but wearing a broad smile. "Boys," he said, using the informal address that somehow felt perfectly appropriate coming from him, "that was beautiful, really beautiful. You've given us a gift tonight." The veterans' emotion was infectious. Around them, other survivors were sharing similar reactions with cast members and crew, their approval transforming what could have been merely a successful film premiere into something approaching a sacred event. "Mr. Fig," Styles said, "thank you for everything you shared with me. I couldn't have done this without your stories, your willingness to trust me with your experiences." "You earned that trust, lad," Fig replied. Not everyone would have taken the time to listen properly, to understand that these weren't just war stories, but pieces of our souls we were sharing. Prince Harry listened to this exchange with deep attention, understanding that he was witnessing something rare, the authentic connection between different generations of service, between those who had lived through historical events and those dedicated to preserving their memory. The evening had evolved beyond a typical film premiere into something more significant, a moment of genuine intergenerational connection, where entertainment had served its highest purpose by creating understanding and preserving memory. The two Harrys had found in each other unexpected common ground, united by their shared respect for military service and their commitment to honoring the stories that emerged from it. As the reception continued around them, both men knew that this encounter would remain meaningful long after the cameras stopped flashing and the reviews were published. They had connected over something deeper than celebrity or protocol, a shared understanding of service, sacrifice, and the responsibility that comes with representing others' experiences to the world. The reception following the screening buzzed with an energy that felt different from typical premiere celebrations. Conversations throughout the room centered not on box office predictions or awards potential, but on the emotional impact of what audiences had just experienced. The presence of actual Dunkirk veterans had elevated the entire evening beyond entertainment into something approaching historical commemoration. Prince Harry and Harry Styles found themselves naturally gravitating toward each other as the reception continued, their earlier conversation having established a connection that both men were eager to explore further. They were joined intermittently by various veterans, cast members, and dignitaries, but their dialogue remained focused on the deeper meanings behind the evening's events. "I keep thinking about what Mr. Fig said earlier," Styles reflected as they stood near a display of historical photographs from the actual Dunkirk evacuation, about these being pieces of their souls they were sharing. "That's exactly how it felt when they told me their stories, like they were giving me something precious to protect." Prince Harry nodded thoughtfully. "It's similar to what I experienced when I met wounded veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq before my deployment. They weren't just sharing experiences, they were passing on responsibility, making you understand that carrying their stories forward was as important as any mission you might undertake." The comparison resonated deeply with Styles, who had never considered his acting preparation in military terms but now recognized the parallels. "There was this moment during filming," he said, "when we were shooting the beach evacuation scenes. I was lying in the sand, surrounded by hundreds of extras in period uniforms, and I suddenly felt the weight of representing not just my character Alex, but every young soldier who had been in that situation. That's exactly what military service feels like," Prince Harry replied. "You're never just representing yourself. You're carrying the reputation and traditions of everyone who served before you, everyone serving beside you, and everyone who will serve after you." Their conversation was overheard by Tom Hardy, who approached them with obvious interest in their discussion. "I couldn't help but hear," Hardy said. "That sense of responsibility you're talking about. It's what made this project different for all of us. Christopher created an environment where we all understood we were serving something larger than our individual performances." Prince Harry turned to Hardy with genuine curiosity. "How did you approach the flying sequences? I imagine that presented unique challenges, trying to capture something authentic about aerial combat without having experienced it yourself." Hardy's face lit up with enthusiasm for the technical discussion. "We worked extensively with RAF pilots, both active and retired. They taught us about the isolation of single-seat fighter operations, the way time moves differently when you're alone in the cockpit, making split-second decisions that affect people on the ground. That isolation is real," Prince Harry confirmed. "Flying helicopters in Afghanistan, you're part of the mission, but also separate from it. You have this overview that gives you responsibility for everyone below while leaving you physically removed from their immediate experience. Styles listened to this exchange with fascination, realizing that he was witnessing a conversation between professionals who understood different aspects of the same fundamental truth about service and responsibility. Hardy had researched and portrayed aerial combat. Prince Harry had lived it in a different context, but with similar psychological demands. Christopher Nolan joined their group, having finished his rounds of interviews and formal obligations. Gentlemen, I hope you don't mind my saying that watching your interactions tonight has been almost as rewarding as seeing the film's reception. This is exactly the kind of connection I hope the project might foster. You've created something special here, Prince Harry told the director. Not just a film, but a bridge between different generations of service. My grandfather served in World War II, and I can imagine him having conversations with these veterans that would sound very much like what we've been discussing tonight. Nolan smiled appreciatively. That continuity of service is something I wanted to honor. The idea that courage and sacrifice aren't confined to any particular generation, that the fundamental challenges of service remain constant even as the specific contexts change. Their discussion was interrupted by the approach of James Pemberton, the 94-year-old veteran they had met earlier. He moved slowly but with unmistakable purpose toward their group, clearly having something important to say. "Your Royal Highness, gentlemen," Pemberton said with formal politeness. "I wanted to thank you all personally, not just for the film, though that was beautiful, but for how you've conducted yourselves tonight. You've shown proper respect for what we experienced." Prince Harry stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Pemberton, the respect is entirely ours. Your generation saved not just Britain, but the entire free world. We're the ones who should be thanking you." "That's kind of you to say," Pemberton replied, "but what I wanted to tell you is this. Service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. You young men, you're serving now in different ways. Prince Harry, your work with veterans, with wounded soldiers, that's service. Mr. Styles, taking the time to understand our stories, to tell them properly, that's service too." The veterans' words carried weight that silenced the entire group. Styles felt particularly moved by Pemberton's inclusion of his acting work within the definition of service, something he had never considered in those terms. "Mr. Hardy, Mr. Nolan," Pemberton continued, "all of you, you've served our memory tonight. You've ensured that stories that need telling will reach a new generation. That's as important as any battle we fought." The veterans' perspective reframed the entire evening's significance for everyone present. What they had accomplished wasn't just entertainment or art. It was a form of continued service to historical memory and national identity. Albert Figg appeared beside Pemberton, moving with the careful coordination of long friendship. "James is right," he said. "We're not going to be around much longer to tell these stories ourselves. Knowing that people like you understand their importance, that gives us peace." The weight of responsibility that Figg's words implied was sobering. Styles realized that his role in Dunkirk represented more than career transition. It was acceptance of a duty to preserve and transmit crucial historical memory. "We won't let those stories be forgotten," Prince Harry said solemnly, and the way he said it suggested both personal commitment and institutional promise. His position allowed him to influence how military history was commemorated and taught, and tonight had clearly strengthened his resolve to use that influence responsibly. Mark Rylance, who had been listening quietly to these exchanges, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, if I may add something," he said in his characteristically thoughtful manner. "What struck me about this evening is how naturally the conversation has moved between past service and present responsibility. It suggests that service itself is timeless, even when its specific expressions change." Prince Harry nodded appreciatively. "That's beautifully put. My father always taught me that duty adapts to circumstances, but never disappears. Tonight has shown me new ways that duty can be expressed through art and public engagement." As their conversation continued, other guests in the reception began to notice the intensity and duration of the discussion between the two Harrys and the veterans. Word spread quietly through the room that something significant was taking place, and many found themselves creating respectful space around the group while straining to overhear portions of what was clearly a meaningful exchange. Kenneth Branagh, who had played Commander Bolton in the film, approached the group with his characteristic dignity. "Your Royal Highness, gentlemen, veterans," he said with respectful acknowledgement of each person present. "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to express how moved I've been by watching your interactions tonight." "Not interrupting at all," Prince Harry replied. "We've been having the most illuminating discussion about service and memory, about how stories like Dunkirk continue to matter across generations." Branagh's distinguished bearing and lifetime of portraying historical figures gave his words particular weight when he spoke. What's remarkable about tonight is seeing how naturally military service, artistic interpretation, and public duty have found common ground. It suggests that at its best, culture serves the same essential function as military service, protecting and preserving what matters most about our society. The observations sparked fresh discussion among the group, with each person contributing perspectives from their own experience. Styles found himself increasingly amazed by the depth and breadth of the conversation that had emerged from what began as a simple movie premiere. As the evening progressed, the connection between the two Harrys deepened from mutual respect and a genuine friendship, bonded by their shared commitment to honoring military service and their growing understanding of how their different platforms could serve similar purposes in preserving and transmitting important cultural values. The veterans who had anchored their discussion began showing signs of fatigue, but their satisfaction with the evening was evident. They had accomplished something precious, ensuring that their stories would continue to be told with proper respect and understanding by people who grasped their true significance. The night was proving to be transformative for everyone involved, creating connections and commitments that would extend far beyond the cinema walls and continue to influence how each person approached their respective responsibilities in the years to come. As the evening drew toward its natural conclusion, the reception had evolved into something unprecedented in either Harry's experience. What had begun as a formal film premiere had transformed into an intimate gathering where genuine connections had been forged across generations, professions, and social boundaries. The conversation between Prince Harry and Harry Styles had become the evening's emotional center, witnessed by veterans whose approval had validated not just artistic choices, but personal commitments to honor and service. The formal protocol that typically governed royal interactions had long since been set aside in favor of authentic human connection. Prince Harry had removed his ceremonial decorations and was speaking with the same directness he might use with fellow officers, while Styles had shed any remaining traces of his pop star persona in favor of the serious engagement that the evening's significance demanded. "I need to ask you something," Prince Harry said to Styles as they found a quieter corner of the reception area. "This transition you've made from music to acting, particularly to this kind of serious dramatic work, what drove that decision? Because it's clear tonight that this wasn't just career ambition." Styles considered the question carefully before responding. "Honestly, it started with feeling like I needed to prove something to myself, that I could do something meaningful, something that mattered beyond entertainment. But working on Dunkirk changed that. It stopped being about proving myself and became about serving something larger. That's exactly how military service works," Prince Harry observed. "You go in thinking you're testing yourself, but you discover that individual achievement means nothing compared to collective mission. The question becomes not, what can I accomplish, but how can I serve?" Their conversation was overheard by Albert Fig, who had been saying his farewells, but paused to listen. "You boys have figured out something important," he interjected gently. "Real service always starts with thinking you're doing it for yourself, but it only becomes meaningful when you realize you're doing it for others." The veteran's words carried the authority of lived experience across multiple contexts. Fig had served in wartime, raised a family, worked for decades in civilian life, and had watched countless young people struggle to find meaning and purpose in their choices. "Mr. Fig," Styles said, "can I ask you something?" When you were our age, facing what you faced at Dunkirk, did you have any idea that what you were doing would still matter 80 years later? That people would still be telling your story? Fig smiled with the kind of gentle wisdom that comes from long reflection on life's mysteries. Lad, we were just trying to survive until tomorrow. We had no idea we were making history. That's the thing about real service. You do what needs doing because it needs doing, not because you think someone will remember it. Prince Harry leaned forward with obvious interest. But you must have understood that you were part of something significant, something that would define Britain's character. Not at the time, Fig replied honestly. That understanding came later, gradually, as we saw how people remembered Dunkirk. How it became a story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But while we were living it, it just felt like chaos and fear and determination to get home. The honesty of Fig's response clearly affected both younger men. They were accustomed to thinking about their actions in terms of legacy and public impact, but the veteran was describing a different kind of service, action taken without regard for recognition or historical significance. James Pemberton joined them for these final exchanges, moving slowly but with evident determination to contribute to the conversation. Harry's right about not thinking of legacy, he said, settling carefully into a nearby chair. But I'll tell you what we didn't know. We were there for each other. Whatever else happened, we weren't going to let our mates down. That's what I tried to capture in Alex, Styles said. Not heroism in any grand sense, but that basic commitment to the people around you. The refusal to abandon responsibility to others even when everything else was falling apart. Prince Harry nodded approvingly. That's the foundation of military service. All the training, all the equipment, all the strategy, it ultimately comes down to that simple commitment. You don't leave people behind. Christopher Nolan, who had been conducting final interviews and administrative duties, rejoined their group as the conversation reached this point. Gentlemen, I hate to interrupt what's clearly been an extraordinary exchange, but I wanted to thank you all personally before the evening concludes. Christopher, Prince Harry said, rising to shake the director's hand, thank you for creating something that brought us all together like this. This has been far more meaningful than any typical premiere. The film provided the occasion, Nolan replied, but what's happened here tonight, this connection between different forms of service, different generations, that's something you all created together. Styles looked around at the group that had formed organically throughout the evening. Veterans who had lived through historical events, a royal who had served in modern conflicts, actors and filmmakers who had dedicated months to understanding and portraying military experience, all united by shared respect for service and sacrifice. I feel like this evening has changed something for me, Styles admitted. Not just about acting or my career, but about what responsibility really means. You've all taught me that serving a story properly means serving the people who lived it. Albert Fig reached out to pat Styles's arm with grandfatherly affection. You were already on that path, lad. Tonight just helped you see it clearly. As the reception officially concluded, the various groups began their farewells, but the connections formed during the evening clearly extended beyond the formal event. Prince Harry exchanged contact information with several of the veterans, promising continued engagement with their stories and their ongoing needs. Styles made similar commitments, understanding that his relationship with these men had become a lasting responsibility rather than a temporary research opportunity. Harry, Prince Harry said to Styles as they prepared to leave, using the familiar address that had developed naturally during their conversation. I hope we can continue this discussion. I think there might be opportunities for us to collaborate on projects that honor military service and veteran stories. I'd like that very much, Styles replied, and the enthusiasm in his voice made clear that this wasn't mere politeness. Tonight has shown me how much more there is to learn, how many stories still need to be told properly. Prince Harry smiled with genuine warmth. I have a feeling this is the beginning of something important, not just between us, but in terms of how we approach our respective platforms and responsibilities. As they walked toward the theater exits, both men were surrounded by final requests for photographs and comments, but Their attention remained focused on the veterans who were also departing. These elderly men moved slowly, supported by walking aides and family members, but they carried themselves with unmistakable dignity and satisfaction. The evening had accomplished something rare. It had created authentic intergenerational connection around shared values of service and sacrifice. The veterans felt honored and heard. The younger participants felt educated and inspired. The filmmakers felt their work had achieved its highest purpose of preserving important memory and fostering understanding. Outside the theater, London's evening air felt charged with significance. The premiere had ended, but the connections and commitments formed during it would continue. Prince Harry had found new ways to think about honoring military service through cultural engagement. Styles had discovered deeper meanings in his transition from entertainment to serious dramatic work. The veterans had seen their stories received with proper respect and understanding by a new generation. As the two Harrys parted ways, each heading toward their different lives and responsibilities, they carried with them the knowledge that service takes many forms, but always requires the same fundamental commitment: the willingness to place something larger than oneself at the center of one's actions and choices. The evening had proven that respect for military sacrifice could unite people across vast differences in background and experience, creating bonds that transcended celebrity, protocol, and social boundaries. It had demonstrated that when approached with proper seriousness and humility, the stories of those who served could continue to teach and inspire long after the events themselves had passed into history. Most importantly, it had shown that the values embodied in military service, duty, honor, sacrifice, commitment to others, could find expression in civilian life through art, public service, and the simple act of listening to and preserving the stories of those who had gone before. The two Harrys left Leicester Square that night with a deeper understanding of their own responsibilities and a friendship founded on shared respect for service in all its forms.